Hey, Motorman here with yet another chat. The last one we did when I talked about the history of Harley Davidson, you got so many hits on that. I was shocked, really shocked. And I asked people at that video if they'd like to hear about how I became a motor officer and the what's now known as the Motorman. Everybody said yes, they'd like to hear the story. So here it is, and I'll give you the short version. First, I'll start with my motorcycle riding history prior to becoming a motor officer. Back in '74, I buy my first motorcycle. It was a Honda 404, and a friend of mine had to ride it from the dealership. I didn't even have a license at the time. He rode it from the dealership to his house up in Chappaqua, New York. Beautiful area to ride, by the way. It's about 40 miles outside of the city. And, I knew how to coordinate a clutch and throttle because my father taught me to drive a stick-shift car when I was about 12 years old. So that was no problem. I knew where the controls were. And he was an experienced rider. And I said, what do you got, can you give me some tips? He says, yeah, follow me. That was it. That was the only instructions I had for many, many years. And back in '98, I bought my first big cruiser. And to me, it was big anyway, with '98 Honda 750. And I bought it because there was a Shadow Ace. It looked a lot like the Heritage, but it was $5,000 instead of $20,000. And I was a little shaky, hadn't ridden in a while. And shortly after that, I'd heard about the agency I worked for was going to start a motor squad. In fact, one of the deputies, there was a grant from the federal government. If you wanted a motor squad, they would give you the money to buy the motorcycles, the gear, and everything you needed. And he went through all the paperwork, and he got this grant shortly after the grant came about. He actually wound up leaving. He had applied with the post office, and he did all the hard work, but as soon as they got the grant for it, he left. And later on, I trained him, by the way. He wanted that motor officer training, and I trained him for free because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have got on the motor squad. In fact, initially, I didn't get on the squad. It was a very political thing, and they only had 3 motorcycles they bought. In fact, they didn't buy Harley Davidsons. They bought Honda Ace Tourers. And the Honda Ace Tourer sort of looked like the Harley. It had the bags like a Road King, but it wasn't a police bike. They had to convert it. The reason they got them is because they figured, well, we'll save some money. They were $10,000 instead of a big $13,000 for the Harley police bike. Of course, by the time they converted it, put the lights and the sirens and everything that it did not come with, they probably had about 12 grand in the bike. But anyway, the first 3 guys that went down there, one of the guys was a good friend of the sheriff. He was in his late 50s at the time, and this is pretty intense training. And he, I think, broke his ankle about the 3rd or 4th day, and it was a 2-week course down in Tampa. So now they got just 2 guys that make it through the course. And I'd heard about this, and I happened to be walking into the sheriff's office, and out comes the major and the lieutenant, and they're talking about this incident. And they looked at me, they said, Jerry, you ride a motorcycle, don't you? I said, yeah. You got a license, right? Yeah, I have a license. Would you like to get on the motor squad? I said, well, this is my lucky day. Of course I would. Well, they called up in Tampa. The course was almost over by that time, so they couldn't get me in there. But they did send me up to the Highway Patrol up in Tallahassee, Florida, which worked out really well in that it was a 3-week course versus the 2-week course that they had sent the other 2 guys to. And the thing with the Honda was it was a 65-inch wheelbase, 32-degree rake. It didn't turn near as sharp as the Harleys did. And the course was set up for Harley Davidsons. In Tampa, they actually stretched the course out another foot so that the Hondas would fit through the course easily. But at Tallahassee, the troopers wouldn't do that. In fact, the head instructor, his name was Marty Chastain. In fact, I hadn't seen him in years. I ran into him last year. But anyway, he was like a drill sergeant type. And I had spoken to some of the guys. There was 14 troopers and me, 1 deputy in the class. And I talked to some of the guys, and they had never ridden a bike before in their life. The only way they could get on the motor squad is they had to have the ability to pick up a down bike. As soon as if they were able to do that, and you wanted to be on the motor course, they would send you to school. So knowing this, the first day of training, they had us. We're in a big parking lot. It's a gigantic place for training. It had a track on it, everything that you could possibly need. And the Marty Chastain, the sergeant, he comes up and he yells attention, and the troopers all stood up at attention. In fact, I found out this was like their boot camp where they trained all the troopers, and they treated them like they were in the Marines. I mean, screaming and yelling at these guys. So I'm not used to this stuff, but I got in it, stood at attention with him, and he says, anybody here know how to ride a motorcycle? And here I am thinking, well, some of these guys don't, so I should raise my hand. So as soon as I did, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. especially the fact that the trooper next to me said, "You just made a terrible mistake." And this guy jumps in my face and he says, "You don't know shit about riding a motorcycle, but you're going to know if you make it through this course." He was exactly right. I quickly found out that 20 years of experience I thought I had was really 1 year's experience repeated over and over again for 20 years. I was actually still a beginner. But when I made it through that course, I realized that this was phenomenal training. Everybody who rides a motorcycle should know these techniques. And there were some things that we were taught there that the average civilian wouldn't need. For instance, they had us going through dirt and through the woods and going through a row of trees that were just wide enough to get the handlebars through. But you're not going to need that as a civilian. But most of the other things you will need. It's a lifesaver. 3 techniques: head and eyes, and how to use them to their fullest. In fact, the difference between an amateur and a professional is the degree to which you use the proper techniques. So when I finished the course, now I know how to ride a motorcycle for the first time in my life. In fact, the fact that the Honda was bigger than the Harleys or a longer wheelbase made me a better rider than most of the other guys in the class. There was only 4 inches to play with on the police course with the Honda. The Harleys had about 1.5 feet. In other words, you could make 1.5 foot error on the Harley Davidson and still make it through without hitting the cones. With the Honda, it was 4 inches, and I made the instructor ride my bike, the Honda, through each of the courses. And because I figured, well, if he can do it, I know it's possible, and I'd be able to do it. And I did. In fact, when I got on the Harleys afterwards, it was like a dirt bike in comparison. But anyway, when I finished this course, I said, I need to teach this, that the whole world, everybody who rides a motorcycle should know these techniques. They make riding so much more fun when you actually know what the hell you're doing, and so much more safer. And I started teaching some of my friends. And I told them about the training I've been through, and one of my friends he's like the know-it-all type, big ego kind of guy. And I explained this to him and how these techniques work. And he said, "Well, I've been riding for 30 years. I know what I'm doing." So I said, "Well, follow me." I take him to a parking lot, and there's the line spaces there. And any parking lot you go to, 1 space is 9 foot, 2 is 18. He's got a Harley Springer, and I said to him, "You think you could turn your bike in 2 of these parking spaces?" And he looked at it, he says, "Yeah, no problem." And he gets on the bike, and the handlebars are shaking, and he gets about halfway through, and he's got the bike straight up, and his foot goes down, and he realizes that, no, he couldn't. I said, "Well, if you can't make a simple maneuver like that, what happens when you're going 50 miles an hour and a car suddenly pulls out in front of you? If you can't lean, turn, and swerve that motorcycle and know how to use your head and eyes, you're probably going to look at that vehicle, and you're going to slam right into it with the brake lock sliding on the ground." So a lot of people started to realize that I had a particular set of skills that was much better than anybody else. In fact, motor officers are the top 2% of riders in the country because of the training we receive. So I said, I'm going to make this in such a way that, on the motor officer course, you're not riding your own bike, so guys don't care about dropping it. You're going to drop it a whole bunch when you're trying to learn at 18 feet. So I figured out through a little experimentation with some people that 24 feet was the ideal size for an exercise, because out on the streets, you got 12-foot lanes. If you want to make a U-turn, that would be 24 feet. So I based everything on 24 feet. I took the actual police course and just widened it out to about 24 feet so that any rider, it's still challenging, but you can pick it up in just a few hours. And I explained the techniques to them and how it worked. I demonstrated the exercises. And I got quite a few people that I trained absolutely free till I got it down. I figured 4 to 5 hours was ideal. Anything more than that for your average person, and they were so tense and so worried about dropping their motorcycle that they would get tired out. They would actually get worse. So I figured I'm going to start this course, and I'm going to get people to come to it. And I think that initially we were going to charge $100, and nobody would come to the course. These people were figuring, I know how to ride a motorcycle. What's this guy going to show me? So I know really what it is. It's an ego thing. Men and women don't think this way, but guys do. They're afraid to take any kind of advanced course because they think everybody there is going to be better than them. At least that's my feelings about it. So I said the way to do this is to come out with a video that shows these exercises, these techniques, and how to set them up, and so you could do it step by step on your own. And that's when I came out with the first Ride Like a Pro video. And I remember I was on a motorcycle forum. It was I had I think a Honda VTX 1800 at the time, and I took a picture of me making a U-turn on that bike within 2 parking spaces, and that was my signature picture for the forum. And people started asking me about it. They said, "Is that photoshopped? I mean, you can't do that on a big 1800 Honda." And I said, "No, I'm a motor officer, and they train us to maneuver the bike." I said, would you like to know how this is done? Would you be interested if you could buy a video that would show you a how-to video, how to ride like a motor officer? And everybody said yes. In fact, I had made a little VHS video in our training up in Tallahassee when I was with the troopers. It didn't have any instructions on it, but it showed what we do and what they put us through. And I made a bunch of copies, and I said, anybody who wants one, I'll send this out to you. And let me know what you would pay for a video like this if it actually had instructions on it. And I got a lot of answers back. People were excited about it. They'd never seen motor officer training. Now, of course, there's a lot of it on YouTube, but at the time there was no YouTube. So people said, yeah, you know, I'd pay any amount of money. I'd pay $100 for a video like that, or $50 or whatever. So I decided to make a video, and I didn't have anybody who, a professional, film it. I had a friend of mine who had a good camera, and we set up in a parking lot. I set up the exercises. We didn't have a remote mic or anything, so I would explain the exercise. I would explain how to do it. Then I would demonstrate it, and I had to tell my friends where to put the camera to get the best angle. So I was like the actor and also the director of the film. And the first video was good, the content was good, but there was a little problem with the sound since we had no mics. When a car passed by, like that vehicle just passed by now, it would the camera would amplify that sound and sometimes drown out what I was talking about. So we came out with the video. I think the first day I put it on the internet, we sold 50 of them the first day on VHS tapes, and I had a Russian, because we were making them ourselves. We even screen printed the boxes. But we've come a long way since then. We're now in the 6th version of Ride Like a Pro. We've sold, I can't say exact number, but it's probably close to 800,000 Ride Like a Pro videos. I started getting so popular that when I would pull somebody over, they say, hey, you're the guy on that video. And you know, you'd feel bad about giving them a ticket. But it really worked out well. It was a good idea. I didn't know when I put that first signature picture on the Honda forum of me making the U-turn. I was test marketing, but I didn't know that's what it was called, and I didn't think of it that way then. But once I sent out that video, and I had all kinds of, I had actually a waiting list for people, because it took me about 4 months after telling people about it and sending out that video I had from the Florida Highway Patrol School. It took about 4 months before I had a video I thought was good enough to actually sell to people. And then a while later, I think 2 or 3 years later, I met a guy, Jim Miller, who is specialized in motorcycle videos. He does all my videos now, and he has the best equipment, the sound guys. We have everything. When we make a video now, it is a professional video. The last one we've done, the new Ride Like a Pro, we've got, I think, 6 women riders in it and 6 men, and 7 or 8 different types of motorcycles. So hopefully nobody could say my bike won't do that. Your bike will do it. It's all technique, and it's just 3 techniques. It's really very simple. It takes a few hours to get the hang of it. After that, you just get better and better. And now I've got 17 schools here in the U.S., and I even have a school in Japan. I didn't realize this, but people who in Japan buy Harley Davidsons, it's a status thing. They even offer in Japan a person, if they want to take the actual motor officer course, you could go there and take it for free, but they're on the smaller sport bikes, and the people on the Harleys, they like to, since it's a status, they want to differentiate themselves from that regular crowd on the small sport type motorcycles. So I didn't know if it was going to be a good idea, but I had a motor officer from Japan come over. I showed him how I presented the course, and he opened up there and is doing quite well in Japan, where they even give you the course for free if you want it. So it was probably the best idea I've ever had. And people ask me now, well, when are you going to retire? And I said, retire? How do you retire for something you love doing? I love teaching this stuff to people. I still get a thrill when I watch the students in my class. We call it the light comes on. Usually it's about halfway through the class, where at first they look like a real doofus. And believe me, before I learned the motor officer techniques, I was a doofus myself. I had figured out the friction zone and the rear brake, but I didn't know about head and eyes, or that you could really lean that bike over to the limit. So when I see these people in the class go from a doofus to a semi-professional in just a couple of hours, and some of them will actually be able to, at the end of my class of 4 or 5 hours, I would get about, probably, if I got 10 riders, I'm going to get 4 of them who are actually able to do the motor officer exercises. I'll shrink them down to 18 foot and get them through it in just a few hours. So I know that my techniques work. I know that with the way I've modified the police course to allow the average person to learn it in a very short amount of time, I know that that works, because I see it every single week, and I get letters by the thousands, or now emails from people all over the country, in fact, all over the world, telling me how I've saved their life and how I've made riding so much more enjoyable and safer for them. And it's a wonderful thing. As a police officer, I got into police work because I like to help people, but most of the time you're shoveling shit against the tide, I call it. In this business, I can help people I've never met, and they're all over the world, and they know who I am. And when I hear from people from Russia and Indonesia, you name it, I hear from these people, and it's just a wonderful thing to be able to help so many people and to make their lives so much better and so much safer. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope I didn't go on too long. And I got a couple of requests from people. They say they'd like to hear some of the stories I've come out with from my police work. They know, if you know a cop, and he's always got some great stories. If you're not in the law enforcement business, you probably like hearing these stories. And my approach was always, in fact, the state attorney once told me, how do you get so many written confessions? And I explained to her how I did it, and she says, well, that's it's legal, but it's not orthodox. And I believe in being unorthodox. I've done it all my life, sort of. Maybe you call me a rebel, I don't know. But I'll come up with ways to get around whatever I need to get around. And I do the same thing with my students at the course. Whatever works, I'll use it. If it's negative motivation, positive motivation, sarcasm, comedy, whatever it takes to get them to know as much as possible in the shortest amount of time as possible. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you'd like to hear some of my war stories, I'll be glad to tell you a few of them. You'll probably find them pretty entertaining. Till next week.